All right, let's get started. Well, thanks everyone for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. So my name is Sophie Harrison, and I'm a Senior Account Manager at Newcomp Analytics. I'm going to be kicking things off and then passing it over to Kathleen, our Data Analytics Lead, who's going to be doing today's demo of Alteryx Predictive Palette with a focus on Python models. So I'd like to take the time to thank everyone for joining us. I know the world's a crazy place right now and a lot of stuff going on. So of course, we're not able to run live events and interact with you guys how we normally would. So we're really trying to run as many virtual events as we can so we can keep people informed on what's new in the analytics market and with specific tools such as Alteryx. Of course, we're also here to provide some complimentary enablement throughout this time. So at the end of the webinar, we'll highlight some of the upcoming events and things that we're offering, like some complimentary office hours to really help folks get through this time and make sure that they're leveraging their tools to the fullest of their extent. So our objective today is that we want to showcase Alteryx's robust capabilities within predictive analytics, and we're going to be focusing on the Python models. We did a session like this with R models a couple of months ago. So if you are interested in learning about the R side of this, we can share that content with you and go over it with you if you'd like as well. So feel free to just send us a note. You can ask questions in the chat window now or send us an email later. Either way, we'll make sure you get that information. So if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to put them in the Q&A or the chat. We'll be monitoring that to make sure that we address them either through the webinar or at the end. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Newcomp Analytics, we're an end-to-end analytics provider that does software licensing, implementation services, strategic consulting, mentoring, and training for all aspects of analytics. So that's everything from analytics strategy to data warehouse development, to cloud architecture, to data engineering, to business intelligence development, and of course, data science and advanced analytics, which we'll be tackling today. As an Alteryx partner, we're here to support both people who are considering Alteryx as well as existing clients. So if you're using Alteryx on a trial basis, our job is to make sure that you have the support that you need through a guided trial to help solve the use case you want to take on. So that includes answering any questions you have about the licensing or the tool, the functionality. So after this webinar, if you are on a trial of Alteryx, we're here to help get it extended to 30 days. Or if you'd like a trial, we can arrange that as well. We're also here for existing clients. We can provide things like best practice advice, implementation services, staff augmentation, training, mentoring. We're again really here to make sure that you're utilizing Alteryx to its fullest extent and answer any questions. So without further delay, I'm going to pass things over to Kathleen, who is going to dive into the demo.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Sophie. Hi, everybody. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. As Sophie mentioned, we can't run virtual events, but really happy to have you here. The number one question I usually get is this being recorded? Yes, it is. So don't worry, you're going to get a recording of this at the end if you miss something that I do. Also, you're free to ask questions throughout using the questions or the chat that's available. I may not get to your question right away, so may just leave them for the end. But I'm really going to break this up into a couple sections. So if there's something that catches your interest, write a question. It may be something that I answer a little bit later, or it's something that I just catch along the way. All right. So what we're going to be discussing today is the Alteryx Predictive Palette with a focus on Python. So some of you may have joined a session that I led before, so I apologize, the beginning may be a little bit repetitive, but I do like to have everybody on the same page when we talk about predictive analytics, what it is, and how it could help you run your organization. So the goal of most data mining projects centers around predicting the behavior of future data. In order to make predictions on future data, there has to be a model that it's built on. Usually this is some type of historical data to capture patterns, trends for current data. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be historical in the sense of a date. So it could just be previous information, but it doesn't necessarily have to be data information. It's just to look at these patterns and trends. After creating a model on this type of historical data, The goal is then to apply this model to future data where the predicted variable is unknown. In order to do so, I like to follow the CRISP-DM model. Like I said, data mining, predictive analytics, ML, AI, whatever you call it, is tossed around so much these days. There is a lot of different interpretations to what it could actually mean. So what I like to do is I just like to follow a set rule process in order to make sure I'm creating the best model possible. So in any type of data mining project, whether you're looking at ML, your custom code, or anything, there is a methodology that needs to be followed or that's recommended to be followed. For those of you who are just beginning their data mining journeys, you're going to realize that it takes a lot more than just advanced algorithms to make a project successful. We're going to be talking about the CRISP-DM model. I just want to briefly cover the 6 main stages that they have available. The first one being a business understanding phase. This is one of the most important phases in the CRISP-DM model. This is the stage where the business and the data scientist come to a mutual understanding of the business objectives of a project. This means that the people who get the answer at the end and the people who are asked to answer the question at the beginning are on the same page. So many times I show up at a client and there's just a huge misunderstanding about what is being asked. Of course, any model that doesn't target the desired business objectives has a pretty low value to a company compared to a model that correctly addresses the business objectives and solves the company's high priority problem, which is why the stage is so critical, just coming to an understanding of what's available and what can be done. This is also the stage where we determine the business success criteria. So we ask the business, what would make this project a success? And then that's when you agree on a reasonable target. The second stage is a data understanding, where the initial data is collected and explored. Each field is explained, what it represents, along with any non-obvious hierarchy mapping, KPI definition, similar language, and also any unique project terminology to be defined. The data quality is also determined at this step to see if there's any errors, missing data, or inconsistencies. And this is something that I'm going to showcase when I talk about the Python-based machine learning tools that are also available in Alteryx. And then a decision is made on how to deal with these problems. The third step, which is Alteryx's bread and butter, is data preparation. If the data is not in the correct format, it can take a long time for data scientists to clean it. And depending on how messy the data is, this can account for up to 80% of a data scientist's time during a project. It is always really appreciated when companies have clean data in a usable format, but we know that's not always the case, which is why we leverage a tool like Alteryx in order to help us get the data in the proper format. Now, Alteryx goes beyond that data preparation phase, and it's also used in the modeling stage. This is where we actually perform our model based on the business objective, and this is something that we'll be covering today with the tool. We also have the evaluation stage. This is where we evaluate how our model does in terms of accuracy. Companies can do this in several different ways, but one way data scientists at NewComp evaluate our models is by building a model on the subset of data, then verifying the model on the unseen subset of data. For example, randomly split a data set into partitions of 70 and 30%, build our model on the larger portion, and then verify it against 30. In this case, if it's not accurate enough, or if it does not answer the business objectives and questions, we go right back to that first phase. We need to make sure we have a successful evaluation stage before we can consider deployment. If you go through all these processes and the model is successful, then that's great. We use it in our deployment, and we can integrate our model to our business systems. So understand the data, understand the business problem, understand the data, prepare the data, model, evaluate, and deploy. Like I said, Alteryx is really great at doing all of this, and it also has some additional features. Now, there are a lot of tools that are natively baked into Alteryx, including the predictive palette. And if you ever kind of explored any of these tools, you may know that all those predictive tools have an R base. However, Alteryx also gives you the ability to utilize your own code. That can be R code, Python, different run commands, and a whole range of suite that's available in the developer palette. Even though Alteryx has its own integrated tools, you can also integrate your own custom model if you feel that there's something that's maybe not available, while also leveraging Alteryx's ETL capabilities. So you have that data prep portion, and you also have that portion with the model. In Alteryx, all of the predictive nodes are actually just R macros, but the new ML suite leverages Python, which is why I wanted to bring both of them up. The Python tool can be found in the developer palette, and if it's not natively available, I'll show you how to access it. If you still can't find it, make sure you check your version of Alteryx. And as a side note, that new machine learning suite as well has that base code, although you won't be able to see it, but I'll do a quick demo of it at the end. So what you need to do for the statistical procedure is we want to make sure that because we have a model that's not written in Alteryx already, I want to integrate that into my data with Python. Today, I'm going to be going over how to connect to data to create a cluster model. And in addition, I'm going to run some Python code in order to open a web page. The two have nothing to do with each other, but there's just so many things that you could do with Python that I just decided to do two completely random use cases for the tool. Python itself, if you're unfamiliar, is an interpreted, high-level, and general-purpose programming language. It has been very widely used across industry and educational institutions for its basic manipulation capabilities, all the way to its complex data science capabilities. In our last series, we covered the R tool, the language that all of Alteryx's predictive tools are leveraged on, and this time we're going to be focusing on the Python tool, which came with the release of Alteryx version 2018.3. So if you're currently using a version of Alteryx and you're not able to update, for example, maybe just come talk to us after. We'll hook you up with a trial or give you the newer version in order to test out the tool. All right, let's jump into the tool and showcase it. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Alteryx, let's just give a quick demonstration here, just a quick walkthrough of the tool so you're not completely lost. But this tool is, flexible data analytics tool, has a ton of powerful capabilities, and can be used for both the data analyst and a business user through simple drag and drop functionality. It's really easy to manipulate data, discover quick insights. The way that it's separated is at the top, I have the ability to save, Alteryx workflows as they're called. Then I have a bunch of tabs located at the top. These are different palettes, and each of these palettes contain a range of tools based on the tab that's located. So for example, if I say I have some tools in my in and out palette, this is to bring information into my tool and bring information out. Preparation palette, obviously part of the data prep section. It's probably one of the more used fields here, and it's used to do data manipulation. You can also join, union, create fuzzy matches, parse a variety of information as well. Do any of the pivoting that you know and love in Excel with transposing, cross tabs, create running totals. You can even work in your database for performance to do all the necessary SQL joins that you want, but at the database level. And we also have the ability to report. So we could create quick visualizations. I'll create a quick one today with the cluster model. And as always, very important to document your workflow. Some of the just additional bonus tools, although they're not any additional cost, are the spatial analysis, creating of macros, and investigating data for particularly your predictive tools. You may see in the predictive tool palette that I have a little R that's located at the top of my tab. Again, this is because it uses that R code in the background to create these models, but I want to create a custom model of my own. There are other available tools, like I said, in the developer palette, which will help you do this. You can web scrape, download, dynamically update fields, but the one we're going to be focusing on is our Python tool. As you may see, with most of the tools, when you click on them, there's a little description of the tool, And there's going to be usually a hyperlink underneath that allows you to open an example. And this is going to take you through a step-by-step guide on how to set up the Python tool in general. This is really useful because sometimes there's, different types of use cases that you may want to do. And by looking at the example, it's a lot easier to kind of visualize how it's going to look like, similar to what we're going to do today. In addition, there's some added tools, some new features with the machine learning and the text mining suite, and those are additional. But for now, let me just go ahead and bring in my data, and we're going to create a cluster model with Python. Now, I mentioned that my first tools that I really bring in are tools to import data and export. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring my import data tool, and I'm going to connect to a data set. In order to connect to a data set, I'm going to use my configuration window on the left-hand side, and I'm going to connect to a data set. I can choose from recent data sets I've connected to, any saved data sources that I have, and also I have the ability to connect to a variety of files and even drag and drop them in place. As you may see, I can bring in spatial files, JSON files, zip files, CSVs, flat files, etc. But I also have the ability to connect to a database. This can be your SQL database, Snowflake, etc. So many types of custom ODBC connections I could set up as well. And if you're leveraging Alteryx server, then you could definitely connect to data in the gallery. I'm going to select a file, and I'm going to look at this principal components example that I have. After you connect to data, you'll see a preview of it on the left-hand side. Although this may not necessarily show all the data, it does do a preview of the first 100 records. In my case, I don't have a lot of data to work with, only 10 records, so it makes sense that it would show up. But like I said, what I want to do is I want to check on the quality of my data. In order to do so, I'm going to click on this browse tool and drag it and drop it and connect it to my tool that already exists on the workflow. At the bottom of my screen, you'll see that I have a results window that's going to show me a list of all the values that are coming in through my data set. And you may also notice that there is a green bar underneath the headers of each of these fields. Alteryx is constantly doing a check of your data quality to make sure values aren't missing, there's no errors, null values, etc. And if you do have any of those inconsistencies of your data, you'll be able to see a preview of it in the results window. And the browse tool that I just used was used in order to, track down any of those changes or any of those errors and make any of the necessary changes. For example, if I click on something like country, I'm going to see the type that I have, the number of records, the data type size, the longest value, shortest value, alphanumeric, etc. So just constantly taking a look at your data to make sure that everything is being run smoothly. Now, luckily, I don't have a lot of errors here, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the data. So in this data set, we have countries from around the world, and they're broken up by their liquor, wine, and beer consumption in liters per year, along with information about average life expectancy and heart disease rates. And the heart disease rates are cases per 100,000 people. Now, if this information is concerning, this is from Time magazine in 1996, so don't really worry about yourself too much of these numbers. I'm sure a lot of these have gone up with 2020. So what I want to do first is I want to change some of these data sets. Like I said, I want to create a cluster model. For those of you who are unfamiliar with cluster modeling, essentially I want to see which countries have similar drinking, life expectancy, and heart disease habits, and if there's something that ties them all in together and compares them. Now, I already have these two additional fields, PC1 and PC2, because this is a principal component summary that I personally did when I was using the integrated tools in the predictive grouping section of Alteryx. So I was able to create a k-means cluster analysis, but it didn't necessarily give me the results that I expected because it didn't have some of the additional components that I created in a Python model. I do know, however, when I want to create a cluster model, I need to make sure that my values for liquor, wine, beer, life expectancy, and heart disease are all numerical. In order to do so, I'm going to head to my preparation palette, and I'm going to bring in my select tool. The select tool is my favorite tool. It's used to deselect fields you may not need. For example, I don't want to bring in my principal components 1 and 2. In addition, I could also change my type. So I'm going to change these to doubles. You can change them to integers. But I just want to make sure that I have a value that has some type of decimal place, because I know that that's what I'm going to use in my cluster model. Now I have my data and the correct format. I'm going to go ahead and run the workflow, and I'm going to take a look at the output. Another really nice thing is with the tools, you'll always be able to see the input and output by clicking on the input tab and output tab around each tool, which is also found in your results window. You'll see that the actual values don't look any different. That's because I just changed the underlying metadata. And if you want to check changes in your metadata, on the top of your results window, you'll also have the difference between the string and double. All right, so now the piece de resistance, I want to bring in my Python tool. Now, in order to bring in the Python tool, you have to head to your developer palette. And like I said, you also have to have version 2018.3 and above. If you're unsure of your version, you can always click on the help window and take a look at about, and you'll see that I have an Alteryx admin designer and it's version 2020. If you still cannot find the Python tool in the developer palette here, just go ahead and click the plus sign that says add or remove tools. Scroll down to your developer palette and make sure that Python is selected. Sometimes when you install it for the first time, it's just not available. So just make sure that it's there and click OK. My version of Python may still be a little bit different than yours just because of the versioning. But this version that I'm working with is we're going to be leveraging the Juniper notebook. So I'm going to head to my developer palette and I'm going to bring in the Python tool. You'll notice that the input of the Python tool is gray, and there's these 2 white arrows on them. This suggests that I don't necessarily need to bring in data. I could connect to some type of outlying data source or bring in values in order to run the tool. So the input is optional. In addition, with the 2 white arrows that I have on there, it shows that I can have multiple inputs. In my case, I just have the 1 input, and this is the information from my select tool to Python. Now, a little error, or a little warning rather, just showed up on Python, and it's asking me if I want to reload the view because something new has just connected. Now, a note. When you input the Python tool, you must run the workflow in order to input the data you are bringing from the anchor into the Jupyter notebook. Again, this is such a common question I get. People connect their data, they try to run the Python code, it's not working. Very simple, you just have to run the workflow. So the data will not actually be communicating with the notebook until it's run. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Even though I don't actually have any code written out, it is important for me to take the first step in order to bring the data in. In addition, just keep in mind it may take a couple of seconds for the Jupyter notebook to appear. So if you've clicked on it and you're waiting, just wait a few seconds, up to a minute, in order to pop up. And again, if it's still not working for you, save it, close it, reopen it, rerun it, etc. You're going to know it's running if you get information about the available help functions at the top of your screen. So on the left-hand side of my configuration window, I'm now working in Python. It says run Alteryx help for useful information or functions, i.e. read the number 1 input, Alteryx write, get workflow constants, etc. But we'll be talking about some of the things that we'll be using here. For the first line of code, you're going to see from Alteryx, from AYX rather, import package. So what this package is installing is also import Alteryx here. It imports the Alteryx API package, which will allow you to pass data between the Python tool and the Alteryx engine. The notebook is split up into cells. So if you want to run an individual cell, you can use the run button at the top of the screen. There are a variety of packages that are loaded by default in Alteryx. And to install a Python library that is not included by default, I'll show you how to do that in the next demonstration. I have a couple of links that show you all the packages that are automatically installed in Python. So I'm just going to open up one of those pages now and show you here. There is a ton of help documentation available. And again, it'll show you that first task that you have. So import Alteryx, any Alteryx help, get started, and also any of the data science packages that you'll need. I'll be personally using pandas today, and I'll be also using this science kit here for my cluster model. But if you need to install a package of your own, I'll show you how to do that in the next demonstration. All right, back to the tool. So we loaded the data attached to the Python tool, and now I need to specify the anchor that the data is coming through. There are a couple of options here because I have the ability to input multiple data sources or not even bring one in at all. In my case, the data that I want to bring in is coming in from this anchor, and it has information about my country, liquor, wine, beer, life expectancy, and heart disease. In order for me to read in the data set, I'm just going to work in the cell here, and I'm going to add a comment. Pound symbol is used for comments, so I'm going to say read in data. The data I'm going to define by the ultrix read tool, and then I'm going to call it number 1 because it's coming in through my number 1 input. As you'll see, the tool, integrated tool, is very good, I guess, when I'm going to do open bracket, close bracket, parentheses, etc. And also I had some help because the very first line at the top is telling me Alteryx read number 1, and that's going to read in my data set. Now I want to make sure this worked, so I'm also going to print out the input data. And the data is just called data, so I'm just going to print it out. Now you can start at the top and run each individual section, or you can just click through to run all the fields. Now that I've run the cell, so in my number 2 cell, to print out my data, I have a list and I also have a record number. Keep in mind here that the record numbers start at 0, when in Alteryx the record numbers start at 1. Just something to be careful about when you're comparing your data. Also another common error that I see. So I've successfully read in the data, and also, run these commands before you run the workflow. So I already said run the workflow to input the data, but then when you want to make sure that the data runs through these commands, you do have to run the commands and then run the workflow, or else you're going to get an error of file not found. If this is still coming up, try to save the workflow and then run it again. Now, I want to add more to this model because I'm not just bringing in the data, I also want to use the k-means model from that ski kit that I was talking about, the Learn Python module, and write some simple code around it. In order to add another cell, I could click on the little plus sign at the top of my screen. Some other options I have are to cut cells, copy them, paste, move them up or down, run the workflow as I demonstrated, stop running in case it's running for too long, restart, and also to move forward to the next one. And then I also have the option of looking at code, markdown, heading, etc. So just some of the hotkeys that I have at the top here. The model that I'm going to use for k-means clustering is also available. So I could use this in Python, but in this case, I'm going to use it in Alteryx. And like I said, I'm using k-means clustering in order to cluster my countries together and see if I have any commonalities across them. Here I have a useful guide on how to set them up, and I will set them up pretty much the same way in Alteryx through the Jupyter Notebook as well. So in order for me to bring that in, I need to use this new cell that's already been created for me because I clicked enter. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import the kit. Put whatever comments you want, or if you're not a commenter, that's a-okay. Now, some of you who are skilled coders are probably yelling at your screen because I'm not indenting properly or anything like that. The purpose of this webinar is just to kind of show how the Python works within the tool, so I do apologize for the coding etiquette, I just want to make it as clear as possible, especially for folks with a non-coding background. In addition, after I look at the kit, I've imported the k-means model from something that's already included. I'm going to take a look at a subset of my data to feature in the clustering model. I'm going to call this my cluster data. And from the data that I've brought in that I've already named, I'm going to go ahead and bring in liquor. Whoops. I got a new laptop recently, so the keyboard gives me a little bit of guff. Wine, beer, life expectancy, and heart disease. Okay, make sure this close bracket's there. Then what I want to do is I want to make sure that I fit this subset for my cluster model. I'm going to choose 4 clusters here. This goes deep into, why would you choose a cluster model, how to determine how many clusters you need. So be sure to tune into, any of our other webinars that we have about cleansing data, preparing data, etc. So for the k-means, I'm going to look at the k-means model. The number of clusters I'm going to set is equal to 4. I also have to set a random state. Again, this is just all from the code. And not to do with Alteryx here. And then I'm going to fit the cluster data. And then finally, I want to make sure this worked. So I'm going to go ahead and print the cluster labels. Oops. Let's print k-means labels. Okay, let's see if there's a typo here. Yep. Print k-means labels. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, so the error just told me I had a typo, which is great. So you know how that looks like now. So it says to print the cluster labels. So remember, the numbering here starts at 0 instead of 1. So it looks like I have a list of all my clusters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I have 10 countries. Again, remembering that France is actually number 1 and Mexico here is 10. So I have all of my labels, but I also want to analyze the results to see if the cluster model did a good job. In order to do so, I need to visualize it. I'm going to import MATLAB. This is a tool I used a lot in my undergrad and master's. That's what you get for being a physics and engineering major, I guess. But if you're unfamiliar with the tool, it allows for plotting functions and data, implementing algorithms, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and import the MATLAB library. And I'm going to use my trusty import here, matplot, library, pyplot as plot. Now what I want to do with this information is I will use the heart disease and life expectancy to create the axes of my scatter plot, but I also want to make sure the cluster data is being utilized. So the plot that I'm going to create based on that MATLAB information I just brought in is I'm going to use the cluster data that was set previously. And this cluster data, again, since I'm creating a scatter plot, I want to take a look at the heart disease. And a common question here I get is the single or double brackets. As you could see, I'm going to use with my clustering data, I'm going to use both. So my heart disease is going to be in double brackets. My life expectancy is going to be in singles. And then also I want to make sure that I have those k-means labels. So I know that there is the labels for the analysis in each of them. And in addition, I'm going to add a title. And you can call this whatever you want. This is just life expectancy versus heart disease. Plot title. There we go. Okay. Heart D. Okay. Something with the spelling, of course. This is why we already have one here. So I could just copy and paste it. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I have my plot. I create the scatter plot here. I use the plot title, and then I want to actually export the fields. All right, so I'm sure there's just some spelling mistake that I'll see back after, but it usually uses the same thing. So I import the matplot library as plot. I use the scatter plot that compares heart disease and life expectancy with the labels for each. And then I have this visualization that shows me my life expectancy versus heart disease here. So I could already see that there is some type of relationship with this clustering. I have a dark purple section, this yellow, this kind of blue, and the green. So I see an increase in heart disease and a lower life expectancy, and then, you know, a higher life expectancy and a lower version of heart disease, except for this one little country. And this is something that I really want to investigate, see how it's labeled or how it's mapped. I have my 4 distinct groups. So the last thing that I want to look at is, you know, comparing that low, medium, high, and high risk of heart disease and life expectancy with that outlier. I know what these are, but I don't know which country each of these belong to, and I need to be able to map which one of these countries this belongs to. In order to do this, I'm going to write my data back out. So I have all of these outputs in the Python tool, but in order for me to determine which one can be used in order to write out, I need to specifically write it. Now, what happens is if you just try to write out your data without converting it, then you're going to get an error. So a note here is you have to use a supported pandas data frame, or else there's going to be an error. So let me just quickly come back and I'll just copy and paste this so you can see it be done. There we go. So if I just decided to use the regular writing functionality and I wanted to print, you know, the k-means labels, and then use the ultrix write functionality, I should get an error here. So I have this type error, and it's even telling me throughout currently only pandas data frames can be used. So it's specifically telling me the errors. This is another thing that's pretty nice about the tool as it's integrated in, is it is really good at telling you, what the errors are and how to kind of fix it. So once I'm going to import a library, I'm going to import the pandas library here. Use my import pandas as PT. And I'm going to use this in order to convert my labels to that pandas data frame. I'm going to call the labels here. I'm going to use PD. I'm going to look at the data frame. And I'm going to make sure that the data has its proper name, k-means dot labels. Now, after that's properly converted, now I could use the ultrix write function, write out the labels that I just named previously, and I could write it out to anchor 1. Now, just because I only have 5 anchors doesn't mean I can't write out to more. So here it's just kind of limited by 5 because that's what the tool is showing. But after I run the tool, you'll see that I have a success, and it says each of my clusters and what they're assigned to. Now, once again, be careful here, because the 0 is actually the 1 for the record number. So when we have our new data set and we're combining it with our original one, that is something that we need to consider. In order for me to see how my data output looks like, you'll see that I have nothing on the output of my Python model. The reason being is because I haven't run the data set yet. So make sure that all the code is run in the Python model, and then run the workflow overall, and outside of the number 1 anchor, that's where it's going to give you your results. In order for me to combine these results with the original data set, I'm going to go ahead and join these 2 data sets together using my join tool from my join palette. A lot of joins there. So I'm going to bring in the join tool. I'm going to connect the output from my select tool, because I still want this to be a numerical value, with the output that I have from my Python tool. Now the output has not changed the order at all, so the cluster is associated with each country. But I don't have a key field in order to combine on, because I'd have to add the row numbers and then combine them as so. A really nice feature of the join tool is we can join by record position. And by joining by record position, I automatically have the record number and the cluster that's associated with each. In addition, I could also change the name of some of my joined fields, and I don't have to worry about having any write outputs that are just a repeat of the data that I had before. Now I have each of my countries. I have each of my countries input, and I have the appropriate cluster number. Now this is a weird title 0, so I'm just going to go ahead and rename it this cluster here as my output, and then I could create a visualization. Now you could create visualizations a variety of different ways. You can output it into your favorite visualization tool, create a quick viz, compare it with the principal components that I created through the Alteryx model in order to compare them side by side. Or you can also use one of Alteryx's interactive reporting tools. They have this interactive chart, for example. If I wanted to bring in a scatter plot for my cluster model, here I can set my x-axis, my y-axis, same as I had through that little Python output as well. And if you want to output any of those Python tools that I was showing previously, there's also additional tools to do that. You can even do things like add a color layer, for example. If you want to make sure that there's a color for each cluster, then you can see a design that looks very similar to what we had when we were outputting with the Python tool. Create your own custom colors, color code them however you see fit. And then after your report has been run, you can use it in one of your Alteryx reporting tools, compare it with your server, and you've successfully integrated Python and run it against your data while also leveraging the data prep capabilities of the tool as well. So let me zoom out here. And there it is. Perfect. One of the other things that I wanted to mention is, like I said, I wanted to do 2 examples of Python here. So you can, create your cluster analysis, any model, you'll have values, and you could really, start going deep with the visualizations. Another thing that you could do is you can use it in order to, web scrape, bring in a variety of information. I mentioned earlier that we can install packages that are not natively available to Alteryx, especially the Python model. So I just wanted to showcase how to do that by connecting directly with a web browser and interfacing with it as well. Let's say I want to connect to Google's site. I'm going to create a field, and in the website, I'm just going to connect to Google. So nothing really too advanced here. I literally just want something that is going to open the web page. Now, the use case of why I would use this is maybe after you run one of your workflows, you want to open your company website, you want to lead them to a particular link. You can use this tool in order to do so. For me personally, I just want to connect to Google's website. And I want there to be a tool that opens up Google every time I run this flow. In order to do that, I'm going to once again bring in the Python developer palette. I'm going to connect my text input, and I'm going to click run. So again, I need to connect it in order for the data to come in. As always, I still have my import from Ultrix to make sure that the data is talking to the Python tool. But now what I want to do is I want to install a new package. The package that I'm working with here is called Selenium. If you're unfamiliar with it, that's okay. I'm just kind of showing you the process in order to install a package. So I'm going to use the Alteryx install packages. And the one that I want to install is Selenium here. Now, if you're already using this in your Python script, that's great because you are going to need that in order to install it in the Jupyter Notebook in Alteryx. So you have to make sure that it's installed on your local version of Python. I also want to install a WebDriver component, and this WebDriver component is what's going to be used in order for me to open up that web page. So I'm going to use that package that was just installed. I'm going to import the WebDriver. And from the WebDriver, there are some Chrome options I want to use. And I want to import those options because I want to open up a Chrome web browser with Google on it. As always, I want to run each of my sections to make sure that the data is being read. And then I want to go ahead and do any changes if necessary. In addition, it's going to say here that I already have the requirements satisfied because I've already run this previously. So it says that I already have this package that is coming in. In addition, what I want to do is I also want to input the data that I've just input with the Google page. So I'm going to use my data set 1, that's what I'm going to call it. And I'm going to use that Alteryx read functionality again. Now, this time when I'm using Alteryx read, instead of the name, I could do it whatever way I want. This I'm just saying get incoming connection names. So you can import the data like we did previously, or in this case, you could also just import the incoming connections names and also print the data to make sure that it's working. In this case, my data is called data 1, so I'm going to go ahead and print that. And then I could also print the website name as well. Finally, I want to show the link for the website because that's what's going to be open by the tool. Perfect. After that's run, I want to use the definition to open the driver itself. So by opening this particular driver, what it's going to do is it's going to say success, reading input from data 1, google.ca, google.ca. Now, this is all well and good. However, I need to actually connect this with a open website driver that I've downloaded on my computer. In order to do this, I want to make sure that I define this open website driver, because now I'm not only just using my Python script, I'm kind of going beyond Alteryx and Python and opening up another page. So I want to make sure that I have enough information here in order to do so. I downloaded this particular driver and I put it in my C drive just for easy access, but you could really put it wherever you want. And just for the sake of spelling, I'm going to copy and paste it here. And also the driver that I want to return is that website. So I want to make sure that after I run this, it uses that Google Chrome driver in order to open the web page. After I open the web page, I want to make sure that the driver is returned. And the final thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that this web page also gets opened. In order for this web page to open, I need to use the driver here and the open website tool. Now, after I run all this, so it's going to take in Google, it's going to open the website, it's going to take a look at the website, return the driver, and then open the tool. Now, like I said, I already have this set up over here. To show how it looks like. So this is going to open on my other screen. I'm going to try to bring it over here. But where it says data, real quick, let me just try that again because it just always opens on my other screen here. Whether I run the code in Python in this notebook, or if I try to run it in the actual script, it's going to do the same thing. Now, like I said, why something like this might be useful is if you're trying to web scrape, connect to data, or maybe you're trying to pull information from that website, this is just a way in order to connect to it and see it. So 2 different ways in order to use Python, one to create our cluster model, and another way in order to take a look at opening a web page, web browser, which I find are kind of 2 common ways that we use it, either looking at web information or also looking at predictive modeling. Finally, like I said, we have a range of the Alteryx machine learning tools and text mining tools, which also use Python in their background. Now, when we're talking about these tools, it is a little bit different than the R-driven tools, the predictive models, whereas you could see the underlying code and you could see the R developer tools that were used, and in this case, they weren't. So in the future, Alteryx is really looking in order to bring all that together and create assisted modeling and all the predictive models to run Python in the background because they're aware of how powerful the tool is and what a common programming language it is. So that's all I have for the Python demonstration. I'm going to pass it back over to Sophie in order to wrap things up.
Perfect. Thanks, Kathleen. So folks, if you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the questions or the chat windows. We'll monitor those as we just go over our kind of wrap-up remarks. There you go. And if there's any questions that you think of later, you're welcome to email us with any of those. We'll be sending out resources after this webinar, so you'll have access to everything here. So as I mentioned at the beginning, if you are on a trial of Alteryx or would like to get on a trial, we can set you up with a 30-day trial. The standard one is 14 days, so we are able to help get you set up with that longer one. While you're doing that trial, or if you're currently using Alteryx, we're here to also help with the workflow building and guide you along that. So if you are kind of caught on one, or if you're looking to accomplish one through a trial, feel free to reach out to us with that as well. We have a lot of different training offerings for Alteryx. These are some of our upcoming courses that you're welcome to take a look at. We start with kind of a basic, more advanced, and then we get into things like predictive concepts. And then if you have Alteryx Server we also go into that course as well. So see, these are some that are currently scheduled that you're welcome to register for, or we can set up a private session for your group as well. Next slide, Kathleen. And then a little bit more specific to machine learning is we have something that's new that really showcases the newest features from Alteryx. And these are our machine learning boot camps. We have them set up as 3 or 5 half-day sessions. We do this because there's a lot of information to cover off, and we know it's very hard to get a full day committed to a course. So we spread it out over a few weeks, and we also include some mentoring sessions in there, some one-on-one time with the 5 half days, which gives you an opportunity to bring your own data and get really hands-on with some of our resources. Next slide, Kathleen. This is another variety, which you'll see these in the slides that we'll send over. A variety of different boot camps that we offer. These aren't all specific to Alteryx, but we think that these are currently 5 of 6, of the hot topics that we hear a lot of clients either interested in or investing in. So it gives an opportunity to do, some of them are a quarter day, some of them are a full day. It gives you an opportunity to get hands-on with some of these concepts and understand where their value is and why or why not they might apply to your role or to your organization. All right, next one. And then, of course, we actually did have a question that came in.
It was just about extending a trial license.
Oh, okay. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So Roger will set you up with that. That's no issue. All right, fantastic. So in that case, if there aren't any more questions, appreciate the time that you've taken today. You will get a follow-up email from someone from the new comp team in the next day or two with all this information. If you have any questions, you need more info, please don't hesitate to reach out or check out our website. We're here to help you through this. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. And thanks for the time, Kathleen.